On July 21st, 1971, the New York Times became the first major publication to publish an article about modern Graff. And to this day, the origins of modern Graff are still debated, and people debate where it started, when, and who was the first writer. And while the subject of this article wasn't the first writer in Graff history, they were absolutely the first all-city writer that we ever had. And this writer was Taki 183. At the time of the article's publication, Taki was a 17-year-old courier living in the Upper Manhattan neighborhood of Washington Heights. In the article, he talked about how he had been writing for about a year up until that point, and his motivations that he spoke on were the same motivations a lot of us have. He simply just loved the feeling of hitting up, and he wasn't into Graff for any other reason. His job as a courier meant he was always traveling, he was always on the move. Anywhere that he would go, he would bring a marker. He would catch tags just in the commission of doing his job. And while Taki wasn't looking for fame or recognition, as the first all-city writer, as the first writer that people could see up well outside of his neighborhood, he ended up obtaining both. And in examining the name that he chose to write, you end up encountering the roots, Taki, the human being. The 183 in his name is in reference to 183rd Street, which is the street he lived on in Washington Heights. And the name Taki is the shortened form of the Greek name Demetrios. And in doing research for this video, I've seen some conflicting accounts of Taki's origins. But Taki's either a first-generation American born to Greek parents or was born in Greece himself. And given that modern graffiti either was born in New York City or just expanded from it, it really shouldn't surprise anybody that the first all-city writer has such roots. In New York City currently, a significant amount of people are immigrants that are born somewhere else, and New York has served as an entry point for immigrants for over 100 years. And in that 1971 article about Taki, the New York Times said that the people that were involved in graffiti came from all backgrounds, it was all religions, it was all races, and people from all over the city. And in the late 60s, Taki started seeing one name up all over Upper Manhattan, and this name was Julio 204. The inspiration for Taki to include his street name in his name came from Julio, who lived on 204th Street in Inwood. And ultimately, Julio 204 ended up being to Inwood what Taki would later be to the whole city. And that was a name that you saw up all the time, all over the place. And it's worth noting that Julio 204 was and possibly still is Puerto Rican, and Puerto Ricans in the States have a particular status. Despite being American citizens, Puerto Ricans living in Puerto Rico itself are not entitled to representation in government. And on the mainland, despite being American citizens, Puerto Ricans were treated similarly to other groups of immigrants. And this was very much the case in the decades before modern graffiti came to be. Puerto Ricans face widely practiced systemic racism, along with all the lack of opportunities, police brutality, and mistreatment that comes along with being on the bottom rung of society. And this relegation to the bottom is something that pretty much every immigrant group in this country has faced ever since people started going to Africa, kidnapping Africans, bringing them here, forcing them to work. Immigrants are expected to live in cramped, neglected neighborhoods and work for as little money as possible. And on top of this, forget their culture, forget their language, and forget their identities. And when the latter doesn't happen, and when immigrant groups or non-immigrant groups like Black Americans stick to their cultural identities and express them, a lot of times they face a backlash, and not uncommonly, face violence. And in the early 70s, with the Nixon White House in power, this reality for immigrants was very ugly. And it's not surprising that many immigrants or first-generation Americans at that time needed an outlet for expression for their frustrations and what they went through, and they found it in graffiti. And during the same time period, another outlet would become available. About 2 years after the article about Taki was published, in the South Bronx, a teenager named Clive Campbell was about to host a party. This teenager would become much more well known as DJ Kool Herc. And on August 11th, 1973, Kool Herc hosted the first hip-hop party. Prior to this, Kool Herc ran with the graffiti crew, and that's how he got his name. But more pertinent to this discussion, Kool Herc was an immigrant from Jamaica. And just like with graffiti, the origins of hip-hop are still very fiercely debated, especially when it comes to the races of who did what and when. And personally, I have absolutely no interest in taking part in that debate. I can say, however, as Graff and hip-hop intertwined and became one, more and more immigrants rose to prominence in both. On the music side, one of the major innovators of DJ techniques and the creator of the group that produced the first socially conscious record in hip-hop history was an immigrant from Barbados named Grandmaster Flash. On the Graff end of things, the first woman to obtain a lot of fame from Graff was an immigrant from Ecuador named Lady Pink. And as hip-hop culture spread outwardly from New York City, it found itself in cities like Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. All these cities had and continue to have large immigrant populations, and immigrants, first-generation Americans, flocked to Graff in these cities in droves. And I know this to be the case for San Francisco especially because I myself am a first-generation American who started writing there in the mid-90s. In giving this topic some more thought, I came to a realization, and that was pretty much every best friend I had from the time I was like 5 years old up until I left San Francisco was either an immigrant or first generation. But most pertinent to this discussion is that my graffiti mentor was a first-generation son of Mexican parents, and the guy that inspired all of us to write was either first generation or just straight up from Cambodia. And in my early bus hopping missions, when you'd see all of us together, you'd see a little bit of everybody. And instead of a tagging crew, we looked something like a UN delegation. Any crew that I was in was pretty much like this. And any group of friends I had in San Francisco was like this as well. And there was definitely a lot of nonsense associated with growing up in San Francisco in the 80s or 90s. But this diversity, being around all these different types of people, was absolutely the best part of it, and it made it all worth it. And there's no other way to say it but to say that being around all these different types of people from a really young age made me who I am. And knowing people from these places and knowing something about their lives and their culture inspired me to learn even more and just follow these different leads and check out all these different things that become very central to my life. I did a video recently about graffiti and faith, and in that video, I talked about becoming a Muslim. And some of you guys might feel like I might be more so inclined towards Islam because I grew up around a lot of Arabs, and you'd be right. However, as a kid, none of the Arabs that I knew were Muslim. Not my friends, not the dude that owned the store up the street from me, and not his son, who I learned martial arts from. All of these people were all Christian, and I didn't even know any Muslim Arabs until I was in my 20s. But in being accepted by them, by being exposed to their culture and being shown a lot of love and a lot of respect, I was already familiar with this part of the world, with these groups of people, and I was already somewhat inclined to go down this path, even if this path was different than theirs. And it's not just this way with Arabs and Islam in my life, it's like this with pretty much any group of people I've spent time with. And what ends up happening is I start with one grounding or understanding and then do a bunch of research and find a bunch of other stuff that I love and enriches my life. This is how it works for me on a micro level, but on a societal level, it can and does work this way as well. New people bring new ideas, new art, new recipes, new clothes, and new culture. And in a new place, the fusion of new and old creates new versions of all of the above. In my opinion, this enriches our experiences as a whole. And being around different groups of people teaches us how to better communicate and understand and empathize. But as we know, not everybody feels this way. And our current president, his administration, definitely doesn't feel this way, despite some of its members and supporters being married to immigrants, being the children of immigrants, or even being immigrants themselves. Personally, I expect fascists to be fascists and to act like them and think like them, so I wouldn't expect any different. But what is surprising and saddening is that there's people in our community, the graffiti community, that feel this way too. And to be honest, I understand why some of you guys do. Bigotry exists, and it's something that's passed down from parent to child, and it's propagated in institutions like schools and churches. And at the end of the day, societally, there's more pushing you in that direction than not. So some of you guys hold these views because you haven't been exposed to anything else. And to be honest, you haven't even really been exposed to the people you've been taught to hate. This absolutely doesn't excuse you from having these views, and I won't cut you any kind of pass for being a bigot. But for those of us that don't hold these views, we need to absolutely understand why people do if we're gonna better combat them. But to those of you guys that hold these views and been exposed to them, you have to ask yourself why you've been exposed to them in the first place. But there's also something else you need to understand, and that is graffiti and hip-hop culture at large are the byproducts of the groups of people you've been taught to hate. And the communities that produced all these people that created this thing that we love are now under attack under the guise of fixing immigration. And this issue that they're looking to fix will not be fixed by any kind of campaign of violence or intimidation. And for as long as we continue to intervene, both politically and militarily, all over the world, for as long as companies want to pay people as little as possible, and for as long as politicians know that fear, and racism, and hatred translates to votes and money, this issue will not get fixed. All this current campaign is an act of political theater, and a very destructive and deadly one. It's intended to serve as a distraction from some very disgusting and ugly things. And if some politicians can get some votes and some campaign donations from people that want to see immigrants suffer, that's all the better. And with all this in mind, you really have to ask yourself, am I cool with this happening? And if the answer is yes, you need to further ask yourself, what the hell am I doing in this culture in the first place? And that's because immigrants, first-generation Americans and second-generation Americans have not only just played a role in this thing, they played a humongous role in this thing being what it is all the way from the jump. And at the end of the day, if you want to be a fascist, you can be a fascist somewhere else. And how about you take your ass up out of this culture, out of this thing that we love, and stop disrespecting our ancestors and the people that laid this all down?